Welcome to Life Purpose by Design for our conversation today on living focus. Have you heard the familiar phrase, what gets focused on gets done? Well, living focus is much more than just hitting our targets on our goals and our dreams and our visions. It is making that intentional choice to know, to live, and thrive in your life purpose daily, beyond the distractions, the disruptions, and the difficulties that you may encounter in everyday living. On today's conversation, 5 P's to Living Focus, I am joined by a very special guest, author and speaker, Lori Fulver. Join our conversation on Living Focus. Our conversation today, Living Focus, is going to look at 5 powerful words that when you apply them to your daily living, it will help you and empower you to experience God's best for your life, to live forward through our prayers, His plan, His purpose, His promises, and His provisions. And I want you to take note that we have a lot less to do with living focus than what God enables and empowers us to do. So, for believers, when we make the choice to keep our lives focused on Jesus instead of life's difficulties and distractions and disruptions, we can experience daily victories through our prayers of faith and then trusting and believing and accepting God's best, His plan, His purpose, His promises, and His provision. I am so glad that you joined us today as we welcome our special guest, author and speaker, Lori Ford, so that we can talk about living focus. Hi, Lori.
Hi, Sheila. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you for keep coming back to Life Purpose by Design and hanging out with me. I'm always enriched by our conversations and when you're sharing your life journey. And so, can you kind of let's start out with you telling a little bit more about who you are and why Live in Focus is something that you said yes to.
Oh, definitely. I think living focus is so important in today's world. It is so hard because we're surrounded by so many different distractions, so many different obstacles, and it takes discipline and it takes definitely a concentration on a different level that even years ago I don't think we needed to stay focused. And so I think it's very important that we're very intentional in order to keep things intact and keep focused on what our true priorities are and what God wants our priorities to be.
And you said something that's so important. You said what our priorities are and what God wants our priorities to be. And I think that is one of the key points to our ability to be empowered through our personal relationship with Jesus Christ on living focus, trying to reconcile those two things. What are our priorities and what is God's purpose? So, why living focus matters, I think, is a question that hopefully during our time together that we will give our audience lots of things to reflect on as they look at their own successes and also their challenges of living focused. So there's a quote that I found while I was preparing for our conversation today from David Denotaris, and it says, "Our focus is our future, and what we focus on will multiply in our lives." And I think that is just so true in so many different ways. And I always think about our focus, that it's a powerful asset that we have. It's not, some people may think of it as a liability, like when you over focus on something, okay, that you focus on it to your detriment because it may paralyze you. But when focus is used in the right way, and like you said, thinking about God's priorities versus our own, it is a powerful asset because it allows us to experience meaningfulness and making progress towards the greater purpose for each day that we have. So with the power of focus, I've learned, Lori, that I can conserve my energy. I don't feel as tired and as burned out and as pulled in so many different
Mm.
directions. You start the day on this high, and then as you get midpoint and further during the day, the more I allow myself to be distracted, then which means I'm losing focus on what I had planned and purpose for that day. It's part of it is just I let a lot of irrelevant things and thoughts and alternative plans kind of get in the way. So when you think about beginning your day, do you mind sharing with us what is a key tool that you use to intentionally be focused for the day?
Sure. There's several things I've thought about that I use to try and stay disciplined. And I say try. I definitely am not always as successful as I'd like to be. But number one, a good calendar. I try and stay very organized with my calendar and keeping times and dates straight. Also, keeping notes of things I need to do, want to do, because as I'm getting older, I know my memory is not as clear and strong as it used to be. And so I depend on written notes faithfully, and written notes on past conversations, past events, and things that have happened that I can reference back to, and also a very good file system that so that I can stay organized and not just have piles upon piles on my desk of things that could get lost. And so that when I need to reference something, I know where to go, where to find it, and I can easily find it, because when you're disorganized, that's even more frustration and a more emotional disaster and loss of focus. So these several disciplines have just helped me to stay more focused and less emotional on a daily basis.
Well, Lori, I definitely can relate to you using the calendar. And actually, I have alarms for everything. I have a 30-minute reminder, then I have a 10-minute reminder, and then I have sometimes even a third level of a 5-minute reminder.
Oh, that's
Um,
good.
When people are in the home with me, they're like, what are all these alarms going off? But I use my phone alarm system a lot for alerts. But one of the things that, and I do the written notes. Now, the other thing that you said, I may need to come and let you mentor me, because if you can see the other side of this camera, my office is everything but organized. They are kind of like, I'm in the process of organizing, but I have stacks kind of everywhere. And actually, to go live today, I just kind of slid some stuff off my desk so my space would not be cluttered. So I'm still working on the filing system. That's not one of my strong points for living focus right now. But you mentioned something that, doing that organizing and coming up with something that works for you, because focus comes in a lot of different shapes and colors and sizes. So I just want to encourage our audience that find a system that works for you. And system might even be too strong of a word right now if someone is not feeling focused, but just find a way, just one way that works for you, and maybe just keep working it and fine tuning it. And then you can kind of grow from there. Because everyday life, we're going to face distractions, we're
Yeah.
going to face disruptions and difficulties. That is just a part of life. It's something that we all have to deal with. But focus means eliminating those distractions, or at least having a mindset or strategy for acknowledging that you will have distractions, and then figuring out how to eliminate them. And if you can eliminate them, just minimize the effectiveness of those distractions on your staying focused. And there was a quote that I found. It says, focus means eliminating distractions, not just from other people, but the things that we do to distract ourselves.
Oh, yes,
So
definitely.
the other side of this camera, these stockpiles, is something that I did to distract myself. No one did that to me. I have to take full responsibilities for that. But through those ups and downs, and I'm gonna, give me about 2 weeks. I'm gonna have it all organized, and I'm going to go looking for something, and it's probably going to, be restored to some version of what it looks like now. If I don't do my filing system right. But staying focused, we can't just think about the here and now and the date. We really have to think about how it affects us in the long term. So, short term, long term, do you struggle with, I can do it short term, but long term, I tend to dwindle off?
I do because I get so busy and I take on a lot more than I can chew at times. So then I get behind. But one thing I have learned, and some of your audience probably does know my journey and some may not, that I'm a stroke survivor at age 29. And so one thing that I have learned and learned to analyze is, and I think this is important for all of us, no matter what, is I've learned to really recognize my limitations. And I do have limitations, not only physical limitations, but I'm just recognizing in my older age that my brain has limitations just from the stroke, and now just by age, I'm facing more limitations, and just recognize those limitations and to give myself some grace for those limitations, and also ask for help when I need help, and um, put things in place so that I can be more successful and feel better about where I'm at. And I think that's important to be successful and whatever that takes to be successful.
I'm glad that you shared that with us because sometimes people think of focus as this little small thing, like, okay, I'm off track today, I'll get back on track tomorrow. You and I are talking today about that whole lifestyle, the intentional choice to live focused, not just to be focused on a task or in a moment, but to live a life of being focused.
Right.
And part of that being focused is knowing what your purpose is and not just your general, this is my life purpose to be a, Bible teacher, to be a speaker, to be an author, but what is your purpose daily? Like, how do you show up daily for yourself? And more importantly, how do you show up for in a way that honors God? And how do you show up focused to serve those that God has planted or has purpose for you to serve? So for me, living focus is that you have to consistently persist towards whatever it is that you need to do. Stay concentrated on whatever that priority is for that day, if it is a task, or if it's something that God has kind of shown you that this is a direction. So your priority is to follow Him in that direction so that you can experience about bringing about the intended result to completion. I like what Paul says in Philippians 3 verses 13 through 14. And I read this in several different translations, and I like what the message version says. So Paul says, I'm not saying that I have all this together, that I have made it, but I am well on my way, reaching out to Christ, who has so wondrously reached out to me. Friends, don't get me wrong. By no means do I count myself an expert in all of this, but I've got my eye on the goal where God is beckoning us onward to Jesus. I'm off and running and I'm not turning back.
Mhm.
I love that translation.
That is
There's an acknowledgement that there's a process, right?
correct. Yes,
There's
yes,
acknowledgement that, hey, I ain't got it all together, so don't look at me as the role model. There's some things that Laurie, you and I probably can share things that have worked for us, things that have been lessons learned. But I'm sure that you will agree with me. It's like, hey, I'm no expert in all this,
right.
but like Paul says, but I'm off and running and I'm not turning back.
Correct. Correct. Exactly. And it's very easy for each of us to get distracted. You know, and I personally get very distracted and very overwhelmed, as I know many people do, by the big picture versus taking things one step at a time. And I think you know. unfortunately, we're in a world today of social media and comparing ourselves to others and looking to others and depending on others for sometimes our well-being, our happiness, and that's just the world we live in. But unfortunately, um, I do it, and other listeners out there, you may do that also. But it's one more distraction and one more way that it takes away from the focus and the true purpose God has for us. And it's just so important that we don't lose track of the big picture.
And the big picture is a word that you said earlier, and that is grace. And so I'm also looking at a comment that Minister Eddie Frederick says, um, now I do not feel so bad. I'm not alone in my focus. And Minister Frederick, trust me, just like Hebrews says, there's a whole big cloud of witnesses. I promise you that we are all in this together. And so that's why I think this topic is so important is for us to figure out how do we live focused together. We
Hmm.
know that it's something that we all struggle with. We know that it's something that we will always struggle with because there's always going to be a distraction. So, Laura, you've kind of talked to us a little bit about your describing your journey to living a focused life, talking about your experience with the stroke and with the recovery journey because the journey continues.
Oh,
And
sure.
you also shared with us some of the disciplines that you've employed to stay focused with, taking notes and creating systems. But what is one of your if you had to say, what is my number one challenge or my most frequent distraction to living focus? Can you highlight that again for us?
Sure, I say just staying on top of being organized, not getting behind and losing track of important things. And most importantly, I'd say is just recognizing my limitations and making adjustments where needed. And I think that's so hard for all of us to uh, recognize our limitations. And when we recognize them, putting our hands up and saying, "Hey, I need help." We do not like to say we need help. We like to be independent. I was extremely independent before my stroke. I am extremely independent after my stroke. And I do not like to ask for help, but we all need help. And sometimes we need to ask for help, whether it's a pride issue, whether it's just an independence issue. We are a very independent nation. We're a very independent
And
race.
okay,
And
so you're back. Thank you, Laura. You're back with us. We lost you for a minute, but you're
oh, I'm sorry.
that's
Yes.
okay.
So,
You're back.
we like to be independent, and part of that independence uh, is facing our limitations and saying yes when we need help.
And and sometimes I can only speak for myself. If somebody were to come in my office and see these stacks and piles of things, they'd be like, "Oh my God, how do you get anything done in the midst of this?" And normally I can say I know exactly what's in my stacks, so don't touch my stacks. Well, right now, because of the way that I created the stacks, I have no idea what's in those stacks, but I have to acknowledge that. Um, I have to also acknowledge right now that no one can help me with these stacks because no one can look at what's in my stacks and kind
Mm,
of figure out what my purpose and my intent was for, the content that's there. So I have to focus on getting it to a point where I can ask for the help. So where I can ask someone to say, okay, here's a stack of something that's related to just A. And this is kind of what we need this is the end goal for A. Can you help me bring it together? But
yes.
right now, I just have to dig in and do that. So I want us to look at what I'm calling 5 keys to living focus. And so we're going to just do some highlights of it. I think this is going to be a topic that we're going to be talking about for quite some time
Mhm.
between now and the end of the year. So I wanted it's kind of more of like an introductory to the topic. The first is a life that's focused on prayer. So that's the first P, prayer. And I think we have to ask ourselves, how or why does prayer help us focus? Now, for me, Lori, and you feel free to answer this, but prayer puts me in tune with first of all, the person who gave me my purpose. It also is a safe place where I can be totally transparent with my strengths, my weaknesses, but most importantly, prayer helps me hear from God to determine what his priorities are.
Mm, I love that. That's wonderful. Yes, I have a good mentor that I speak with uh, almost weekly, and we just met, and she said, with your busy calendar, are you making sure that you're praying before you're taking on each and every obligation?
That's important, Lori, because one of the things that God helped me with, that every good thing, that there's what he said was, Sheila, there are a lot of good things that you can do, but I have not called you to do every good thing. And what
Exactly.
I plan to bless, what I plan to make provision for, what I plan to fulfill my promises on is the good thing that I purpose you to do. And so both you and I are both, speakers and authors. And so there are going to be times when we will get an invitation that if we're not prayerful, we could lose track and end up in the wrong place at the wrong time or off of our alignment with God's timing and his purpose. Because our heart is to serve him. Our heart is to encourage people. And, what could be wrong about going and telling people about Jesus? Nothing. Well, we have to make sure that we are the messenger that have been assigned for that assignment.
Right.
So the first P is prayer, and that prayer is essential to our being able to live a life that's focused. The second P is plan. So making a plan to focus. And I know there's a saying that what gets planned, gets done. But I can tell you right now, that's not always true because I have lots of plans, but they don't always get done. So, why does having a plan help you focus? If that's something that you're wondering, at least planning puts you in the ballpark. It gets you to do that brain dump. It gets you to try to set priorities. It gets you to kind of put it all down on paper or wherever you keep your stuff to say, okay, this is kind of where I think I'm headed with this. So, how do I get there?
Right. Right. Yeah, plan is like the outline for a book report. It's the beginning. At least you have something to start with.
Okay. So we got prayer, we got a plan, and then we have purpose.
Mm.
And purpose is kind of like the foundation of it all. You have to have purpose driven focus, or you will be any and everywhere. If you don't know the why behind where you're going, what you're doing, you will not be focused. You cannot be intentional. You might be doing some things, you might be accomplishing some things, but it may not be tied to your purpose. So you may experience even more difficulties because you're trying to do something that you weren't created and meant to be. So purpose, I know, is very big for both of us, Lori. We've had lots of conversations about purpose. Do you have anything that you want to share with the audience about purpose-driven focus?
I just totally agree with you. And many times that's hard to figure out what your purpose is. So I think it goes back to your number one of prayer. And if you don't know what your purpose is, start with prayer, and God will reveal that to you if you don't have your purpose yet. But uh, your purpose will drive your activities.
Okay. I agree with you 100%. So the fourth P is one of my favorite words, promise, because hey, let's pray, let's make a plan, and let's be purpose. But I'm looking for the reward of a promise fulfilled focus. I'm looking for when I'm praying and believing and trusting God, when I am aligning my plan with his plans, when I am seeking and feeling clarity on what his purpose is, then I'm looking for the reward. Not like, pat on the back. Oh, Sheila, you did real good. You said a prayer, you did a plan, you align with purpose. I'm looking for the promises that God has given us, the assurances that we get from being in a personal relationship with Him. And so that when I hit the roadblocks, when I hit the distractions and the difficulties and the delays and disruptions, I can stand on the promises. And there are so many promises in the Bible, but you can just go to the Bible and find a promise for every situation that you may encounter, every difficulty. God has made this so easy. All we have to do is seek Him, look in His Word, and there's a promise. And maybe your people may be, I've met people say, I don't even have a hard copy Bible. That's fine. You can just Google God's promises regarding whatever situation that you may be encountering. And I promise you, you're going to find more scriptures and you're going to find other people who've experienced similar difficulties who can be a testimony to the promises that God has made available. So, talk to me about being focused based on God's promises, Lori.
Oh, I think that is wonderful. I think many times, uh, you know, looking at not only the promises that He has bestowed on your life, but looking in Scripture, the promises He's shown other biblical characters and um, other people's stories helps encourage us, and uh, that's such. Great resources and valid points, because we all have our highs and we all have our lows, and when we think we have our purpose, and then we have our discouraging moment, we need those promises to pick ourselves back up.
Yes. And then the fifth P is provision. So you've prayed, you got a plan, you feel like you have clarity on your purpose, you're believing and trusting in the promises of God for provision so that we can sustain that focus over the long haul. Again, it's one thing to say, hey, I made it through the day. I think I was focused. I stayed on track. I didn't, go in too many different directions from where I think God was leading me, but the provision to sustain that for the long haul, to be able to see God's intended milestones for us and the progress that we're making. And on those days when you feel like you're not making progress, knowing that God has made provision for every single need that you and I could ever possibly have. And that's why Ephesians says, more now unto Him who can do immeasurably more than we can ask, think, or imagine. That is provision.
Yep.
That is provision at its highest point. So, one of the things is, you may be asking, why does confidence in my needs being met help me focus? Because you have one less distraction. You're not thinking about what am I lacking? Am I going to have, the financial provisions for this? When I get this far down the road, what's going to be there waiting for me? When you know that God has already made provision for every single thing that He has purposed, and that you and I step out to say yes to, that gives us a confidence that's beyond words to me.
Yeah, that's true. That's all very true. And I wholeheartedly agree. So if you're within His purpose and His plan, He's 5 steps ahead of you.
Yeah. So I want to shift gears for a minute, and I know that we've talked about, living focus from our everyday experiences, lessons learned. We've shared very candidly and authentically about our journey and some of our challenges. But I also found two biblical examples of what it means to live focus. And that's found in the book of Matthew in chapter 14. And this is about Jesus and Peter when they are found out on the water. And Peter and the disciples are in a boat going on a journey that, Jesus has given them an instruction. So the first P that we talked about was prayer. And this particular story in the Bible shows us that Jesus engaged in prayer as part of being focused. he had told the disciples to get in the boat and to meet him to the other side. So part of what we see Jesus doing as they're on this journey, as he sent the disciples ahead of him. And of course, if he sends us, he's already there waiting for us. But he himself engages in prayer. So this demonstrates the importance of us um, engaging in prayer in order to live focused. And even Peter himself engaged in prayer because as they've gone through this journey, Peter finds himself in a situation where he's feeling a little uncomfortable. And the thing that he does is that he prays. And so he ends up crying out during this encounter, like, Lord, just save me. And listen, that's 3 words. So if you're getting caught up today about, what do I pray? How do I pray? How long do I have to pray? Peter said, Lord, save me, period.
Wasn't very long, was it?
It's not the word count that's going to matter when you are praying for focus. Just say what's on your heart and trust God to hear that prayer and to answer it. The second P that the story emphasizes is a plan. Jesus had a plan to send the crowd ahead of him to the other side. So during this journey, Peter also had an encounter. He encountered an opportunity or a plan to decide he's going to join Jesus on the water. And so he makes a plan to exit from the boat. And Peter's plan is obedience. And that is the greatest plan that you and I can have. And that is to obey the instructions and the directions that God gives us. So Peter's plan may not have sound like a plan on the surface, but his plan to obey in order to exit, obedience is the best plan that you and I can have. So our plan, Peter shows, does not always go as planned. When I was doing my research, it said that there's an estimated 5 miles journey from where Jesus had them to get on the boat to where they're the other side. But we also know the story where they said about 3 miles into the journey is when Peter started experiencing a crisis as he was focusing on his plan to get out of the boat and meet Jesus on the water. So I think that's where purpose comes in, because what was this all about? The purpose was, one, Jesus had a plan for them to know that if I tell you to go somewhere and to do something, you can trust me that you're going to get there and that I will be there with you. But Jesus has also challenged their faith in this, because when Peter said yes and got out of the boat and started experiencing his difficulties, he allowed the fear of his circumstances that he was facing to distract him for the purpose, for getting out of the boat in the first place. His purpose was, okay, Jesus, I'm coming out here with you. I'm going to meet you on the water. Right. But he allowed his circumstances. So when you think about circumstances that you have faced, Lori, that have kind of distracted you a little bit from focus, has fear been a part of that, or would you say it's something else?
Oh, I definitely think fear is part of it. I think, fear of failure, fear of what other people will think, fear of my own abilities. So yes, I think fear in many ways affects our focus. And again, it's all a matter of, are we keeping our eyes on God and his plan and what he wants, or are we inwardly looking at our own abilities?
Yeah. So I want to encourage our audience that maybe you find yourself in some lifeboat today, like Peter, and you have a desire to obey. You feel like you've gotten some clarity about what your purpose is, how to go forward with living focus. But then you're in this boat, and then you're like, okay, is this really God leading me? Do I need to say yes to this? I want you to go back to the first P that we talked about and that Lori's encouraged you, and that is back to prayer. Yeah. That's going to give you your clarity, seeking the word of God, seeking wise counsel to help you navigate the boat that you're in, whether it's time to step out of the boat and whether it's God that's calling you to step out in faith to do that which he has purposed. So maybe you need to just think about, what is the boat that I'm needing to. First of all, you might want to think, have I even gotten into the boat with the first instruction that God has given me? And now he's telling me to get out of the boat. And so I just want to encourage you. Part of living focus is making sure that you've heard the instruction in the first place. And so the other key that Jesus and Peter illustrates here is promise. Jesus demonstrates his power over Peter and his co-traveler's fear because Peter says, if it's you, Lord, then I'm on the way. And one of the things that I wrote down is that Jesus had his eyes focused on Peter, even when Peter did not have his eyes focused on him. I was in the part when that just hit me, and I was like, Sheila, even when you are not focused on pressing in and hearing from God and getting clarity of not just an instruction and a direction, just communing and spending time with him, his eyes is always on me. His eyes is always on you, Lori. His eyes is always on you as a listener to this message, that Peter may have shifted his eyes, but Jesus never took his eyes off him.
Oh, what a good point. We forget that, don't we?
Yes, yes. I was dancing in the park earlier when that reminder hit me. And then the fifth P is provision. Jesus guaranteed their safety and he restored their faith in his true identity. And Peter got to serve as an instrument for Jesus to demonstrate his authority over the distractions, the disruptions, and the difficulties that Peter was facing in that moment. And even in Peter's decision to lose focus, Jesus, like, I still got this. Okay, you lost focus. That's a moment. And that's what you've got to hear today. When you lose focus, when you are distracted, when you go left instead of right, it's one moment. It's one moment in eternity. Don't let that one moment of feeling like you're sinking or feeling like, the winds of life is just going to blow you back when you thought you were going forward. Remember what Lori said, grace for that one moment, and just keep moving forward. I want to ask our audience today, do you sometimes struggle with why the struggle is so hard? If Jesus told me to get in the boat, then he's telling me to come out to him to meet him in this. Why is the struggle so hard? Can taking my focus off of the instructions and the directions create this much difficulty? I don't have the answer for that. I think that you have to really, because in life in general, you can try to do everything as perfectly as you can. You're still going to have the distractions.
Mm-hmm.
You're still going to have the difficulties. So don't let your distractions and your disruptions and your difficulties determine whether or not you're in alignment with God's will. That cannot be the only standard, because if it is, we are all in big trouble.
Right.
Thank God we're not. But even with the struggle, it's hard. For me personally, it presses me into focus even more. Because I've got to get that answer as to, is this the thing that God is working out for my good? If it is, hey, let's go forward with it. He's going to be the one to take me through. If it's something that I have created, then I need to be redirected so that God can refocus me so that I don't have unintended consequences. Some of our lack of focus will result in unintended consequences. But like Lori says, grace for that moment, and all is not lost. We just have to, reset, refresh, and re-engage. So Lori, I want to just share quickly some what I call living focus motivators that I took away from Peter and Jesus's encounter. Peter's act of taking his eyes off Jesus and having his little moment of, sinking and coming back up, it does remind us that what people focus on can become magnified, especially when we're dealing with fearful circumstances. Peter did have the boldness to make a decision to obey, to get in the boat, to obey Jesus, to get out of the boat. He was already in a rocky situation. Remember, the wind had already started blowing. The boat was already rocking before Peter found himself sinking. So today, what do you have to lose by living focus? Where we find ourselves, We already dealing with some rough, rocky waters.
Right.
We're always going to be dealing with that. So having the courage and the faith to just step out for what may look like an easy journey. I guess Peter was saying, it can't be that bad. Jesus walking on the water. I'm just going to go out here with him. Maybe you took that first step that you thought this is easy, this is smooth sailing, I got this. And then it happens. But when Peter made the decision, and when you and I make the decision, Lord, to totally trust Jesus, we are reminded that even when we take our eyes off him, he never takes his eyes off of us. So it reminds us that when we're living focused, it can calm our fears of the unknown. It builds momentum. It allowed Peter to get out of the boat. It sustains our progress beyond life's missteps towards our milestones. And Peter rebounded, and him and Jesus got back in the boat together. And most importantly, we can live our best life, the life that God has purposed for us by design. Venus Williams says, I don't focus on what I'm up against. I focus on my goals and I try to ignore the rest. And I think that is wise counsel for all of us, that we don't have to focus on what we're up against. We can focus on our goals. Peter focused on, momentarily he thought about, okay, I'm about to go down. But eventually he refocused on his goal, and his goal was to meet Jesus.
Yeah.
And
So many times I think, Sheila, we take the first hard step of like Peter did walking on the water, but then we veer off and we lose our focus, like you said. So when we get the the urge and the abilities to take that first step, we just got to keep going.
Yes. And you said the key word, keep going. It's that simple. If you're still struggling with, how do I live focused? Lori has just told you, keep going. Keep going. I found this Galatians 2:20, and I want to kind of close with this. It says, I identify myself completely with him, meaning Christ. The life you see me living is not mine, but it is lived by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. I am not going to go back on that. So, with those words of keep going, I want to just thank you, Lori, for joining me for this conversation on Living Focus. Thank you for the nuggets that you've given me to tackle what's on the other side of this camera with my stockpiles and working on my system. And I want to thank those of you who are listening to this live or listening to the replay. I want to encourage you to just keep going. You can engage in prayer, plan, purpose, promise, and provisions to live the life that you were intended to live on purpose. Be blessed, and I hope that you will join us next time here at Life Purpose by Design.